As I talked about with a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Cleveland Browns as well, there are reasons that certain teams are picking in certain spots every year in the NFL draft. And there are certain reasons why certain teams seem to always find themselves in the top 5 or the top 10 of the draft in particular every single year. And sadly, for a lot of fans all across this great country of ours, the Oakland Raiders are one of those organizations. They are a team that for more than a decade now has really been kind of frankly irrelevant. That's bad free agent signings, bad trade decisions, constantly running through head coaches and front office personnel, and a lot of failures, not surprisingly, ties right in with all of it in the NFL draft. When you look at the Raiders' draft history over the past 3 seasons, there's been some hits, some incredibly big misses, and then some still really big questions pertaining to players that they have picked over the past few years. Now, if you look at some hits, maybe somebody like a Denarius Moore, who was a fifth-round pick a few years ago, you could classify him as a hit. This is a guy that's been a productive NFL wide receiver, and you got him in the fifth round. Stefan Wisniewski, interior offensive lineman in the middle of the draft. This past year's draft, getting somebody like C.O. Moore in the third round, the tight end Michael Rivera in the fifth round. Not star players, but guys that were productive that came from the middle of the draft. So if you're a fan of the Raiders, you look at last year's draft and you see some of the success in the middle and you see some other successes with later round picks, and you're like, it can't be all that bad. But then you realize just how bad some of the big misses have been by the Raiders. You look at last year's draft, they had a fourth-round pick in Tyler Wilson. That was so bad that he was beat out by Mike McGlynn, a undrafted rookie. Your fourth-round pick at quarterback, Tyler Wilson, doesn't even make the team. What a huge miss. You can make the argument that the entire 2012 draft for the Oakland Raiders was one big miss. And when you pretty much have one big miss throughout your entire draft class, that doesn't bode well for your future. And that doesn't exactly suggest that you're going to be doing anything other than picking again in the top 5 or 10 in the 2015 NFL draft. Not to mention some really poor decisions in terms of mortgaging the future for veterans that had seen better days. Trading a first-round pick out of the 2011 draft to get Richard Seymour, a first-round pick in 2012, and a second-round pick in 2013 to get a Carson Palmer. Again, the whole Raiders thing of getting caught up in the name and caught up in the BS, and for some reason trading for these guys that were past their prime and had seen better days, and you're mortgaging first and second-round picks to get these guys? It's no surprise to me at all that we see the Raiders consistently year in and year out be viewed as one of the least talented and overall worst football teams in the National Football League. And even when you look at that 2013 draft, you've still got questions big time with their first and second round picks. Was DJ Hayden really worth taking 12th overall? Menelik Watson, your second round pick. Now that Veldheer is gone, we're going to find out whether Watson could be a left tackle for that organization or not. Just a lot of misses and a lot of questions when it comes to the recent draft history of the Oakland Raiders, and actually you could probably say that over the past 10 plus years, frankly. Now, in terms of the 2014 NFL draft, the Raiders have a total of 6 picks. They've got a first rounder, a second rounder, a third rounder, a fourth rounder, a sixth rounder, and actually 2 seventh rounders. I apologize, 2 seventh rounders. So a first, a second, a third, a fourth, and 2 sevenths. And, for an organization that lacks in talent and impact players in particular on both sides of the ball, it's not exactly a position you want to be in, only having 6 draft picks. That means it puts a lot of pressure on you to either A, trade down multiple times in the draft to accumulate additional picks, which might be something the Raiders need to explore, or if you sit there and keep your picks, or you try to move up the board at all at any point in time to get anybody that you view as a can't-miss prospect, it really increases the pressure to hit on those picks. The more picks you have, the more margin of error you have ultimately. And with only 6 picks for the Oakland Raiders in the 2014 NFL Draft, there just isn't a whole lot of margin for error. And again, the shameful thing is that for a roster that is so depleted of young talent on both sides of the football, offense or defense, they don't have the draft picks that they need to effectively address those holes on a long-term basis. You can sit there and talk about the money they spend on free agency, but again, a lot of those guys are guys 30 or older, guys past their prime, and you're just not going to get anywhere long term with that. It's kind of a similar strategy. What they did in 2013, it didn't really work. They went more in on it in 2014 because they had to spend some of that huge, abundant salary cap space that they had. But how much better did they really become? In terms of a draft strategy, the Oakland Raiders, as much as any team in the National Football League, need to find a young quarterback. They need to find that guy that can bring leadership, bring an impact, bring an identity to the Oakland Raiders that they have lacked for so long. Now, is that going to be a quarterback in the first round or a quarterback later on? I don't know. But at some point in time, they must find that young quarterback. And since they don't have a ton of picks, and I don't imagine the Oakland Raiders being in a bunch of trade down modes or trade down moves, they're going to have to hit, and they're going to have to find impact players in the first and the second and the third and the fourth round, and that's just the way it is. That doesn't mean that it can't happen, because one good draft, one good round of choices could change everything, could change the entire path and future and face of an organization. But when you look at the Oakland Raiders draft history under Reggie McKenzie and before, you can't feel all that incredibly optimistic about this. In terms of the team needs for the Raiders heading into the 2014 draft and tying that into the strategy, they need impact talent, they need a young quarterback, but the bottom line is that their organization is so depleted in young talent on both sides of the football, you could pretty much argue just about everywhere, and again, just about everywhere is a need. So that does, in a sense, put the Raiders in a good position in that they can focus on a best player available strategy throughout. They can't sit there and prioritize one need over another because everything is a fucking need. So that completely removes need out of the equation. And now you could just strictly focus on evaluating the players and finding who are the best players that fit what you do on the offensive and defensive side of the football. In terms of those positional needs that I might say are the most important, I would say quarterback, tight end, offensive tackle, offensive guard, maybe safety, maybe some youth on that defensive line, whether at tackle or defensive end. They need to find that young quarterback. They brought in Matt Schaub, but he might be a one-year starter or a part of one-year starter. They need to find that young quarterback that could become the face of that franchise in Oakland. That guy that can sit there and be what you build that entire organization around. And if that's what you go after, and whether that be a Manziel or a Bridgewater or hell, at this point, maybe a Derek Carr in round one, you must, if you go in that direction in round one, surround him with as much help as possible. You must beef up that offensive line. You must address tight end. You need to add more talent, even a wide receiver, running back. Basically, if you pick that young quarterback, at that point in time, your whole draft strategy has to change to surrounding that quarterback with as many soldiers to help him in the battle in the trenches as you possibly can. If you don't go quarterback in round one and you go truly best player available, then that's what the Raiders need to do all throughout the draft and actually get the best player available and find those impact players because, again, they're so bad in terms of the talent in that organization right now that they need help on both sides of the football. So there really isn't one necessarily bigger need than anything else other than maybe finding that young franchise quarterback for the future.